documentaries and put resources into making those documentaries from around the world. You know, the Oscar went in the Best Documentary category last Sunday to Inside Job, which was about the Wall Street catastrophe. And if you watched it, Charles Ferguson got up, the director of Inside Job, and he said, why aren't any of these Wall Street executives in jail? It was the only political comment made on the night. So that hour. Now you might be wondering, well, these people I'm telling you about, we haven't even played any of this. Well, that's because, oh, and Danny Glover. That's the one conversation we got to play that week. Danny Glover was in town, you know, Lethal Weapon, big star, but he also produces independent films. And some Swedish journalists came to him and said, we want to do a film on the Black Power movement in the United States. And he said, what would you have to offer us about the Black Power movement in the United States in the 60s and 70s? They said, well, we've just found a trove of film, of interviews of Angela Davis and Huey P. Newton and Eldridge Cleaver. Swedish Public Television had done a series in 1960 to 75, one-shot deal. And then they had all these films with hours and hours of interviews. They just languished in the basement of Swedish television until they found them now. It was an amazing documentary that they then put together that Danny Glover co-produced. And we talked to Danny about his own life, his activism, and about Haiti. He's trying to make a film on Haiti. So what happened that week? Why didn't we bring you Harry Belafonte and Robert Redford and, Bobby Kennedy? Bobby Kennedy and Bill Haney. Bill Haney's a director of a film called The Last Mountain, which is about Bobby Kennedy, how he represents the activists in West Virginia fighting coal mining, and particularly mountaintop removal that is destroying Appalachia. All amazing conversations, and we would have had that amazing week for you except the uprising Egypt started to unfold. So there we are in Park City, and Sharif is starting to get texts and tweets and emails and calls, come home. Something big is happening in your country. So Sharif is racing out. Here we are in Park City. I've got the backdrop at the Sundance headquarters of, you know, the lovely fireplace behind me, but instead we are broadcasting the story of another fire, a wildfire that is racing across the Middle East. It was a bit strange to be there. We'd say, from Park City, this is Democracy Now! Broadcasting from the Sundance Film Festival, and you hear either shots being fired or people chanting, no, it's not a movie. It's the real deal. It's the real thing. Who would have thought this was happening? So Sharif raced to Cairo. As he landed, not even knowing if any flights would be allowed in, this is under Mubarak. As he landed and took in the atmosphere in this place where he had grown up, he said, whatever happens, this will never be Mubarak's Egypt again. And he made his way to Tahrir. He brought us the incredible anatomy of an uprising, the 18 days that rocked the world every day. Not just through Sharif's eyes and ears, but with his microphone, bringing you the voices where you could hear the young engineer saying why he was out there, or the young woman activist, or, as we moved further along, Adès Swift, the great Egyptian novelist who wrote Map of Love. She'll be in our studio on Tuesday on International Women's Day because she's giving the Edward Said lecture at Columbia University, but then she was in Tahrir. We caught her just as Mubarak resigned, and she had just left Tahrir to go home, and she was taken by surprise. And she said, my God, I was just in Tahrir with two very pregnant women. Now they can give birth in freedom. And we talked to Nawal Saadawi, a great Egyptian feminist physician, writer who was imprisoned under Sadat and was in exile under Mubarak, as she shouted for joy, always believing all of these decades that one day the people would prevail. Telling the younger people, the younger bloggers, they would come to her house every Wednesday or whatever day it was, the Nawal Saadawi Salon. It will happen, trust me, she said. And they said, why should we believe you? She said, because I believe in you. And you got this every day. And network anchors went to Cairo. And that brought a lot of national attention in this country to what was happening. And they were targeted, and Anderson Cooper was hit, and Christiane and poor Katie Couric were threatened. And what happened then is they went after the satellites, the Mubarak thugs. And we use satellites sometimes too, but it is very expensive. The networks completely rely on them. We are so used to being scrappy and making our way through the internet, sending broadcast quality video. When Jeremy Schaefer was in Iraq, we would use something called the split program because Saddam Hussein had a firewall up in the internet. So he'd send 150 emails, sort of like going through a screen, and we would piece it back together in New York. Now, the networks don't do anything like this. So when their satellites are dismantled, as they were under Mubarak, you see Anderson Cooper in his hotel room in the lower third that says, reporting from an undisclosed location, and he is speaking into his computer over Skype, and you just see him talking. Suddenly, democracy, they are looking like democracy now. And we, Sharif is in Tahrir, broadcasting to the world. He's saying exactly where he is. Our video is being sent, transmitted in other ways, and we're sending these 25-minute perfect broadcast quality pieces. And Sharif becomes one of the top tweeters in the world, figured out how to break through the internet blockade, the fact that the internet was down. Twitter was featuring him. MSNBC, he was on Ed Schultz, on Rachel Maddow, on Chris Matthews. CNN International was going to his tweets. It's trickle-up journalism.
Yeah.
And also it was the authenticity, not just the technology, of Sharif's voice. He knew what he was talking about. He had lived it his old life. His family had lived it. His grandfather was the most famous writer of Egypt, Hassan Abdel Qaddus. His great-grandmother was Rosal Youssef. She was a great Egyptian feminist, started a new magazine called Rosal Youssef, and still is being published today. This is someone who deeply felt what was happening. He is not like what we get on the rest of the networks, on all of the channels. That small circle of pundits who know so little about so much, explaining the world to us and getting it so wrong. How is it that in Tunisia, Ben Ali, the dictator, in Egypt, Mubarak, in Yemen, Saleh, in Libya, Gaddafi, and then in Bahrain and Oman, how is it these dictators last so long when they are despised by their people? Unfortunately, let's take the example of Mubarak. He is protected by a coat of armor made in the USA. One of the few things that are still made in the USA. Dennis is with me, and you'll see him afterwards. He wrote the book with me, Breaking the Sound Barrier. And in the last few columns that we wrote about Egypt, when corporations choose despots over democracy, we began with one of Sharif's tweets. People holding a sign to America from the Egyptian people, stop supporting Mubarak, it's over. So tweeted my brave colleague Sharif Abdel Qaddus from the streets of Cairo. On that day that we did this, more than 2 million people rallied throughout Egypt, most of them crowded into Cairo's Tahrir Square. Tahrir means liberation in Arabic, the epicenter of what was a largely spontaneous, leaderless, peaceful revolution in this most populous nation in the Middle East. Defying a military curfew, this incredible uprising was driven by young Egyptians who compose a majority of the 80 million citizens, most of them poor. Twitter and Facebook and SMS text messaging on cell phones helped this new generation link up and organize despite living under a U.S.-supported dictatorship for the past 3 decades. in response